Welcome to the Therapist Uncut podcast, where off-the-clock therapists who happen to be friends share their uncensored thoughts about real life. Join us weekly in spreading positivity and making mental health relatable through casual conversation, inspirational stories, and real talk with friends who happen to be therapists. Please welcome your co-hosts, Nikki Young and Alyssa Najera.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, guys. Welcome back to Therapist Uncut. We have missed you now that we're releasing episodes twice a month instead of every week. My name is Alyssa Najera, and I'm here with Nikki Young, and we are excited to see you today.
I was actually super tired and exhausted, but Alyssa was peppy and excited. So now I am excited because, and this just fits into what we are going to talk with you about today, emotional contagion.
I just had a cup of coffee because I love coffee I might be addicted. So, all right. If you guys love coffee, you could relate, but Nikki is correct. Today we are talking about emotional contagion. And I will be honest, when this topic was presented to us, I was like, sure, not knowing exactly what that was. And I've never heard of it. Nikki, is this something that you are like well versed on?
I mean, I haven't sat down and studied it. I did last night.
You weren't a part of the research stuff for this?
Yeah, I mean, I was familiar with it, but I'm trying to think of, it wasn't like something we studied in grad school. I think it was probably something that came up in the course of, I don't know, life. But yeah, I was familiar.
You know, what's interesting is I think it was around during grad school. I think I graduated grad school in 2012. So I did not hear about it, but in our research, I think this came about around the 90s. Mm-hmm. So some of you guys are like, nope, never heard of it. Some of you are like, yeah, I read like 3 books on it. They're fantastic. So today we are going to talk about emotional contagion. So let's start with what that even means.
So speaking of the research that you're talking about that dates back to the early 90s, if you look at the definition, we're talking about the tendency to automatically mimic and synchronize facial expressions, vocalizations, postures, and movements with those of another person, and consequently to converge emotionally. Now, though, for those of us, I prefer to refer to it as an intellectual badass as opposed to a nerd, right? It just sounds a little bit cooler. But for those of us who need to break that down a little bit more, what we're talking about is, and a lot of the research talks about how this is not just between individuals, but also maybe groups of people and such. But if we break it down to just you and I, right? I arrived a little tired, a little sluggish this morning. You had some coffee. I then tend to kind of mimic your body language, right? So you're upbeat, you're kind of bouncing around in your chair. I noticed myself sit up a little bit straighter to kind of mirror that. And we start to take on what we're seeing in the other person. That's just an innate part of humanity where we do that. And then the second piece of that, and we can kind of relate this back to CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, right? Our thoughts and influence our behaviors, and which influence how we feel. And it's all one giant circle, right? So our behaviors influence how we feel. So if I'm now mimicking you and acting in the way that you are, I'm eventually going to kind of start to feel that. So, we first logged on to start our meeting about 25, 30 minutes ago, and I am significantly more alert and jovial than I initially was this morning. So thank you, Alyssa, for your positive influence on,
And I guess that's what we're hoping to do when you guys are listening to our episodes, is that we're hoping to also bring you this positivity on most days. I know that some days we talk about some depressing topics, but on most days we're hoping to also help you feel inspired and enlightened and validate all of the stuff that you're going through. So as I was learning more about emotion contagion, it kind of made sense to me. When I was younger, I still like to doodle. I like to be creative, but when I was younger, I'd always make signs for people.
So you do like to be creative. So this whole "you look like you're in a poetry slam" thing today could actually be accurate?
Oh, I don't actually write poetry, but yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, I interrupted.
Today's outfit is full on. I'm about to go do a poetry slam. I don't.
You're killing it.
It was not intentional, but I will take it. I used to write little signs that would have just, I don't know, positive notes, people's names. And one of the ones that I would always write is a smile is contagious. I didn't coin that, but I really liked it when I heard it from wherever I heard it from. And so as I'm focusing more on the word contagion and things being contagious, like I could dig it. I get it. it's this process that happens almost instantly. And it reminds me of what we talk about when we are talking to parents or caregivers or even teachers about the concept of co-regulating and modeling behaviors and not, what's that term, Nikki? Not do as you say, or don't do as I say as I do. Tell me what that was. Is that what it is?
Do as I say, not as I do.
Right. And we're like, no, you need to do so you can model this. And if you're super anxious, your kid's going to get heightened too. We spent a lot of time talking about watch your own personal reactions to all of the things that have been going on in the last year between racial injustices and between politics and between the pandemic. So I'm actually happy this topic came up because I could see it, right? And it's almost like when you go to a concert, and I mean, this has been around forever. There's always a hype man, right? Why? Because you got to get the audience going. You can't be performing to people who don't want to be there.
Let's be real. Is that you? Are you the hype man at the concert?
I could be.
I thought so.
I know in previous episodes I said I'm a little introverted and awkward, but there are moments where I'm like, yeah. So, hype man, yeah. Based on Emotion Contagion.
I can see it. No, and you and you were talking about modeling behaviors, but really that's what it is. You're modeling emotions, right?
Yeah. And I like the idea of applying this not just to the individual. So my example of the individual is the hype man. I think it's a great example. But the group one, I like that. The group and the organization, because we've also had a previous episode about shitty bosses and all of the negative energy and negative just aura that shitty bosses can put out and can really weigh down on staff and employees and teams. So if you imagine having a shitty boss, that we defined all the different ways you could be a shitty boss in the previous episode, or having a really charismatic, positive leadership, those are going to have two very different effects on your organization, right?
Absolutely. You're in a crappy ass mood one morning, haven't had your coffee yet. You walk into work and you've got an upbeat, positive, kind, caring boss. That's going to automatically, because of emotion contagions, can't talk, lift you up. Same thing. You walk in, you could have had the best morning ever. You walk in and there's that person that's just always just crabby and down. It's going to bring you down. Particularly now, right, the research talks about how this effect is often stronger when we are close to that person, right? So a casual encounter in the grocery store with somebody who's maybe not in the best headspace can affect us, but maybe not as much as coming home and, you know, the husband or the wife or the kid or whatnot is in a shitty space. And people have the research is showing people have different levels of sensitivity to it. There's actually a scale out there. We all took it for fun before this, but there's a scale out there that kind of analyzes and assesses your susceptibility to emotion contagion, kind of, I guess, comparing it to how easy you can catch a mood.
I suck at that.
Isn't that the thing? Catch the feels, catch the mood. Yeah,
no,
it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting because the scale breaks it down into different types of emotions, right? So some of the more positive, like love and admiration, and I think that's inaccurate. I don't think admiration is on there, but like love and happiness, and then some of the more quote negative. I, as a therapist, am not saying emotions are negative.
We love all emotions, guys.
In your therapy, your O'Leary voice. So not negative, but maybe the emotions we don't enjoy as much, such as anger, fear, sadness. So it's interesting to see when you take that, if you are more susceptible to catching certain emotions than others. Like some people might be more resistant to a negative mood than a positive, right? Easier to catch happy feels.
It's totally important for you to notice too. And my husband could attest to this. I limit my news intake. I limit my media intake. It took me a very long time before I watched a lot of the, quote, viral videos that have been going around in the last year. I like to watch the Hallmark Channel because there's always a happy ending.
Oh my God, you're one of those.
In the Christmas season, I get in a movie every
Oh God, Anthony, I am so sorry.
You can't be so cheesy, I know. But they make me feel warm and fuzzy.
Alyssa. I mean, how do you go from hype man to Hallmark movies?
I'm awkward. I don't know. It'll make
well-rounded, you're evolved, but fuck, not Hallmark movies.
I love Hallmark movies. That's my self-care. Romantic comedies, Hallmark movies, everything that has a happy ending. And here's the thing. I even avoid Disney movies. Why? Because a parent always dies and somebody always gets hurt and there's always some tragic event. Like, I have to be very conscious about the Disney movies I choose to watch. Why? Because I'm like, I cry. I fucking cry. Lion King, I cried when I was like 8. Haven't watched it again. I am now 33. I can't handle it.
So I can get down with the rom-coms and the happy endings and all that, but I mean, can we at least like get into some with some, decent acting? Oh, did I just say that? Oh,
I will take anything that will make me smile.
All right.
I can't watch scary movies either because I'm like super hypersensitive to all of the music, and whoever's with me, I'm like, and I'm grabbing them and I'm probably bruising them because I'm squeezing them so hard.
So I think you just perfectly transitioned us into something else we could talk about, right? Emotion contagion is used, right? Whether it be positively or negatively, it's used against, I don't know if I want to say against us, but whether it be in movies, right? One of the reasons actors and actresses, I'm sure one of the reasons that they exaggerate certain behavioral demonstrations of emotion is to reach through that screen and to get you to respond to it and then feel that emotion.
And they sure do. And these marketers got us on point. All those Super Bowl commercials. Oh, some of them get you, right? Because they know how to
commercials. You talked about the news, right? And I mean, there was a Facebook actually conducted a study in which they manipulated the content that you're receiving on your news feed, and gave certain users more positive updates on their feed and other users more negative. Now, the ethics of this was questionable, but it was still a study that was done. And then in turn Facebook measured or analyzed users' posts based on and compared them. So Facebook users that are getting more positive messages in their what is that? Not newsfeed. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word. Were more likely to post than positive messages, whereas those users that were getting negativity in their news stream were more likely to then post negative messages. So that kind of alludes to the fact that we don't even necessarily have to see body language, right? A lot of the research talks about seeing it actually visually and mimicking that, but I mean, that alludes or indicates that potentially we just have to hear about it, read about it, see about it, intake it in some way, shape, or form.
I want you guys to consider the power of an emoji. I know some of you shake your head at emojis. A lot of our kids and youth, they constantly communicate in emojis.
They SMH at the emojis? Shaking
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So if you know what that is, you are on top of the game, okay? Because they use acronyms all day. But emojis are so powerful in communicating these emotions too. Because if you can ever think of a time that maybe you felt it was helpful or maybe obligated to drop an emoji in a text that you're sending just to make sure you're not sending the quote wrong message, or when you drop the emoji and you hit send and you're like, oh shit, that is not what I meant to send. And now your meaning is completely different. And the person on the receiving end is experiencing something very different from what you intended. It's just so interesting. And that's what this podcast is about. It's to get you thinking about things, and it's to get you reflecting. And we present these thought-provoking things so you can figure out how you feel about them. And if it does or does not apply to you. If you're somebody like me that is like really highly sensitive to, again, not negative emotions, but emotions that don't feel good, how do you take care of yourself, especially if you're in a helping profession or a demanding profession? Mm-hmm. What are you supposed to do?
I think be aware, right? I mean, about so many things that we talk about, awareness might be the first step. Because if you're not aware of what's happening, it's just going to continue to happen. And that doesn't mean that you can be aware and then suddenly you're immune, right? If we want to make this a comparison to catching a cold, right? It doesn't mean you're suddenly immune. But you could be cognizant of what situations you're putting yourself in, right? If there is somebody that is just a constant negative Nancy and you notice every time you're around that person, you then just take it on and you can't shake it off. That's information. And, how you choose to handle that is up to you. But if there needs to be boundaries in place, you had mentioned the news earlier, and I meant to circle back to that. But currently, and for as long as I can remember in my life, the news has been a very negative place to be in terms of media. Sure, there's the occasional feel-good story, but that's tends to not be the theme of the news reports, right? So there's a difference between being informed and then subjecting yourself to just this constant negative influx of, I don't even know if I use that word correctly, constant negative stream of messages. Because just like the Facebook example, if we're constantly getting these negative messages from the news, that's how we're just going to see the world in that capacity, right? We're going to see the negativity. Now, that doesn't mean don't be informed, but there's ways to get your information that's not a constant barrage of negativity. Right? I mean, just imagine if the news reported on some positive stories as well. Just think about how people could potentially see the world differently.
I would watch the news because I would feel nice and warm and fuzzy inside about all the beautiful kindness and humanity in the world. But it's an important point to recognize. You want to make sure that you are aware. And I'm like, do we need to rename our podcast? Every single episode that we have, we're like, self-awareness, guys, practice self-awareness. But because it's so important to every single aspect of your life, professionally and family life and social settings and relationships, you want to be aware of how certain things do or do not affect you, and then taking the information that we give you and you deciding what you want to do with it from there. So pay attention to the things that feed your soul, whether it's through podcasts, books, audiobooks, certain people, support networks in your life, certain mentors or coaches. You want to make sure that these are things that feed you, or even music. And if there are things that are not feeding you, you probably want to take them in small doses. We don't want you to avoid, but yeah, set boundaries, small doses. One of the things that just came up too is music. Music can be so powerful and positive. But I also have clients who come in and tell me that their playlists are the ones that are not so much of an emotional release as I actually just cried all day listening to all these super sad songs. That's great that you are relating to this music, but I also need you to find music that is speaking to you in a different capacity. That's not bringing you down to a place where you are staying there, but you are now finding the hope. And there's a lot of songs and musics and different genres that can do that too. So just figuring out what works for you.
I mean, that's an example of emotion contagion, right? Or, well, maybe not if you weren't already in a negative mood, but the emotion that these songs can impart based on, and that's another indicator that doesn't have to be body language, right? But based on words and tone and all of these things, it radiates through the speakers and you take it on.
I was just thinking, if you guys get nothing else from today, be your own hype man. Theme song and live your best life.
And watch a Hallmark movie.
And watch a Hallmark movie.
A whole person.
Spread kindness, happiness. We love you guys. We appreciate you guys. If you have not subscribed already, please make sure you guys subscribe to this podcast so you do not miss an episode. And if you want to check out today's show notes, you can go to therapistuncut.com. Until next time, you guys have a wonderful day.
A wonderful, happy, come on, do your voice. Yeah.
I can't even do it on the spot.
No? Okay. All
right. Thanks for joining us, y'all.
Take care, guys.
Thank you for joining Therapists Uncut, a production of AMP Smart Business. To learn more about Therapists Uncut and stay up on upcoming episodes, please subscribe and follow us on social media. As a reminder, although the Therapists Uncut co-hosts are licensed therapists, they are not your therapists. This podcast is not intended to substitute professional mental health counseling. If you need professional therapy, please contact your local provider or primary care provider. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Therapists Uncut.